was such a great operator for the billionaires that Woodrow Wilson sent him to Russia in 1917 with $100 million of his personal war fund to salvage the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Because the very minute they had the Bolshevik Revolution, it collapsed almost before it started, because it was perpetrated by real zanies. These were people who had spent most of their lives in libraries studying books, so they thought they could run the world. Well, I would say that a lot of our politicians in Washington probably have the same training, but these people will goof up anything that they get into, because people with ability will get into a field where they can achieve something, not where they can rob other people, not where they can mess up the government. They really want to accomplish something in life. Now, what you have in Washington is the non-achievers, the people who could never make it in business. I had an uncle in business in Washington, and went up to visit him, and he said, you know, no business person in Washington, this was during the 1930s, said no business person in Washington would ever hire anyone who had worked for the government. And if you put on your resume you'd had a government job, you couldn't get a job in private business anywhere in Washington. That's changed now, of course, but that's the way it was during the 1930s. So you can see that these people are incompetent by the very way that the campaign, the president's campaign at the present time, is being waged. Bush and Gore are actually waging the campaign of 1936. Because I was alive then, and I remember they were saying exactly the same thing. The Democrats were saying we need more government programs. The Republicans were saying we have got to cut taxes. And the Democrats were saying the Republicans are the party of the rich. Although the real millionaires, the Harrimans and the Rockefellers, were all Democrats. But the Democrats will always call the Republicans the party of the rich. And the big money is really behind the Democrats. When you got Rockefellers, you got the richest people. And there are J. Rockefellers in the Senate as a senator from West Virginia. Why isn't he a senator from New York? Because rich people are always very cheap. And he looked around to find the cheapest state in the United States he could buy, and it was West Virginia. So he bought West Virginia and became the senator from West Virginia. It would have cost him 10 times as much to be a senator from New York. And these guys are very tight, especially when it comes to their own money. So we had these two presidential candidates right now waging the campaign of 1936, and the people were bored to death. There was no interest in the campaign because they'd heard it all before. It was a one-note thing. But then something happened which changed the whole structure of this political race. And that was the news leaked out that the federal government is sitting on a $44 trillion surplus. It's still not been officially published yet. But you see, here they were talking about the $4 trillion debt when they have $44 trillion in cash. How did they get all this money? It was because of the prosperity. Because the more prosperity we have, the more the influx of taxes and money into Washington. And this money has been pouring into Washington at such a rate that they're actually drowning in it. So the big secret of the candidates is, first, to keep you from knowing about the $44 trillion surplus, because they got to keep on collecting income tax to control you. They got to keep on taxing you for everything else, even the groceries that you buy, because they are addicted to it. They have to have that tax money. And in fact, as I say, they print their own money anyway. They don't need a penny of it, but they want to keep you under their thumb. They want to keep you enslaved, so the taxation is the way to do it. But both candidates got a little nervous, and they started talking about tax cuts. George Bush has talked about $1.7 trillion. Even Gore has said, well, instead of tax cuts, we'll give them more government programs, which is the Democratic way of life. They can't think of anything else. more government programs. But they are now attacking each other on the tax issue, but still don't tell anybody about the surplus. Now, the story about the surplus is leaked out first through the municipalities and the states. There was a writer who investigated, and he found out that each state and municipality published a comprehensive financial report which revealed that every one of these entities had stashes of many millions of dollars, and that they didn't need to levy any taxes because they had more than enough cash on hand to run the government. But of course they couldn't tell the people that, because the idea of taxation is control, not money. So now we find out the national government is in the same position. They've got this enormous surplus. But at the same time, when they talk about taxes, the editorial writers on all the major papers, Washington Post, they talk about what a tax cut will cost the government. If you cut taxes, you're taking money out of our poor, weak little government in Washington. I mean, you're just being selfish. And that's the way they feel about it. And the press, of course, echoes whatever the Federal Reserve wants them to say. They will say the most preposterous things, and they'll say it with true dedication, and they will try to convince you of it. In fact, when Dan Rather looks at you, and he looks with those soulful eyes, and all he's doing is selling the Federal Reserve program to the American people. But I have always had total faith in the American people that our innate resources and our determination, it's enabled us to survive these lunatics for over 200 years, and I think that we'll survive them a while longer. But what I want to see is more exposure of these people and their total corruption, and the fact, whether you hate them or not, they hate you. They hate you because they feel that they have to hate their victims. So that's why they hate you. They don't hate you because you wear the wrong clothes or not good looking. They just hate you because you're their victims. And they have to maintain that hate in order to carry on the terrible things that they do to you. They cannot treat you like human beings. In fact, I was down with George Hansen, Congressman George Hansen, a few years ago at Dallas, and they had an alert out for him at that time. And so we had our meeting, and we went across the street to a Holiday Inn to have a little lunch. And the government agents were looking for him. And I noticed he was a little nervous. But we went out a side door, and apparently these brilliant detectives from the government didn't see us leave. So they were totally in the dark as to where we were. And they're running up and down the street. Where's George Hansen? We're sitting there drinking coffee and talking. And so he went on up to Oklahoma, and they arrested him there. And George was quite a bit overweight. They put him into a tiny plane and put handcuffed his hands behind his back and flew him to Washington. And he almost got gangrene because they cut off all his circulation. Now, I mention that because these government agents are always told to rough you up when they arrest you. They're not to be nice to you at all. They're to injure you, do anything they want, and make you regret the day that you ever criticized the government. And of course, George Hansen had put out a book criticizing the Internal Revenue Service. So they were really after him. And they put him in prison twice on trumped-up charges, and the charges were later reversed by appellate court. But he did serve the time, because in the time that it took to get through the appellate court, he had already served his time. But the Federal Reserve System itself is probably the most satanic institution in the United States. And it is the greatest moral threat, the greatest threat to your health, because everything that they do directly affects your daily life. Makes it more difficult, makes it more expensive, and it does have a terrible, burdensome effect on you, which affects you even though you don't know it. I've been fighting them all these years because, well, when I was at the Library of Congress doing my research for the Federal Reserve book, I was there all the time anyway, so I joined the staff. And as soon as this book came out in 1953, the Library of Congress fired me. I was the only person ever fired from the Library of Congress for political reasons. And of course I sued them. At that time, I did not have the legal experience that I have now. In fact, I've been into courts ever since. I found that if you're going to have any rights in this country, you got to go to court and you got to stay in court, keep filing lawsuits, and otherwise they're going to stomp you right into the ground. I got default judgments against the FBI, so now they don't bother me anymore. I got one for $50 million and one for $35 million, which I haven't collected yet, but it's on the books. I entered those judgments in the federal courts myself. Because a judge does not enter a default judgment, you go to the clerk, and the clerk has to enter it. And so that's why they're on the books. And of course, the IRS harassed me for years. I went to tax court without a lawyer. I was myself the lawyer. And I had corresponded with the IRS lawyers for about a year before we went to court. And I had stipulated in there that I wanted the IRS to be charged for the fact that they had conspired to put me in a mental institution. The IRS and FBI together in 1959 conspired to put me in a mental institution, mainly because in 1958 I got Ezra Pound out of St. Elizabeth, so they were short one patient. So they figured that I would be a good replacement to bring the numbers back up, the statistics, to keep their budget going, you know. So J. Edgar Hoover issued personal orders to the top 5 assistant directors of the FBI that I be put in a mental institution. And so he got my records from the IRS, which was illegal, so the IRS was cooperating. So I had stipulated to the tax court that the IRS would have to deal with this conspiracy to have me put in a mental institution. So I go into the tax court, and I'm really excited because I'm finally going to run into these IRS lawyers. I wanted to see what they look like. I talked to them on the phone. We'd exchange letters. And I looked around. There was no lawyer from the IRS there. They wouldn't even face me in court. They sent in a young district attorney, and the judge said, well, you gentlemen go into a conference room and see if you can work this out. So I went into a room with this kid, and we were only in there a few minutes, and he agreed that they didn't have any deficiency against me. So we came out, and the judge said, have you gentlemen agreed? And we said, yes, we have. And he has no tax deficiency. And I walked out of tax court with a letter stating I had no tax deficiency. And I don't know anyone else that's ever done that.